many of you listening to this program today completely believe, I mean totally believe, that everything we are hearing about COVID-19 and how we should respond is not at all driven by politics? Let me say that again. How many of you believe that all the information we are getting regarding COVID-19 has nothing to do with politics, but it's all about the science? If you do, my family inherited a bridge that connects Brooklyn to Manhattan, and I have it for sale right now at a bargain basement price.
It's your weekend show with Bob Bierman.
As many of you that have listened to this radio program on a regular basis, at least for the last several months, you may know that I came out of retirement to work in a county to help in their COVID-19 response. This wasn't some small little county in some obscure place. It was a rather large county with a major city. And during the many weeks that I worked for that county in planning for the things we were told to expect, there's a lot of things that I learned. Let me start by telling you, we were told early on to expect 3,000 people to die in our county by around the beginning of June, end of May. We were told to expect an unbelievable surge of people coming to our emergency rooms and hospitals. And we needed to find plenty of spaces for these people, plenty of beds to put all these patients, to isolate them from other people. We were told we needed to have at least a 2 or 3 week period of time when all non-essential businesses had to be shut down. People had to stay home. We had these commercials on the air to stay home and save lives. 2 weeks became 3. 3 weeks became 5. And on it went. One by one, businesses were just going bankrupt and shutting down. Anxiety and fear in people began to increase, almost to the point of being paranoid. I can remember back in March, late March and early April, I was staying in a hotel, a very large multi-story hotel in this city, and myself and a couple of other people doing emergency management work were the only ones in that entire hotel. The front doors were locked. We had to use a private entrance to get into the hotel to get to our rooms. Maid service was unavailable during that time. They would simply drop off new linen and give us a laundry bag to dump the old linen outside in a bin. That's how my life was for those weeks. Was I concerned? Did I want to do my part? We worked looking for extra places to have hospital beds. We bought in strategic supplies from the state capitol and other locations into our region. We prepared by leasing dozens of refrigerated trucks to make them temporary morgues. After all, we were told it could be 3,000 people are going to die by the time you get to the 1st of June. Well, I'm happy to report it was nowhere near 3,000 people. It wasn't 2,000 people. It wasn't 1,000 people. It wasn't 500 people. It wasn't even 100 people. It was 38 people. Not 3,000, 38. Now, you may say all the social distancing, all the staying at home, it prevented the spread of this virus. Yet just like they discovered in New York, about 70% of the cases came from people that were, quote, staying at home. Something about this entire COVID-19 pandemic and panic I'm finding very disturbing. I try to look carefully and pragmatically at anything when it comes to being truthful. I do not have a political agenda except for one, truthfulness and honesty, integrity in the facts. The news media, basically, when you talk about ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, and CNN, wouldn't know truth if it bit them on the butt. They simply are so into an agenda of hate against a president, hate against conservatives, hate and despising Christians who hold to their faith. They cannot be truthful because it is not within their ability to stray away from the party line that they have bought into hook, line, and sinker. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, most of the major newspapers, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the LA Times, are intellectually, journalistically, and in terms of truthfulness, they are totally and absolutely bankrupt. I find them hard to believe most of the time. There have been some chinks in the armor of the integrity of many of the governors that really locked down their blue states beyond imagination. Looking at the state of Michigan, for example, you couldn't leave your home. You couldn't even go to your vacation home. Yet the governor could. The mayor of Chicago said you cannot get your hair cut. You cannot get anything done in that nature. You can barely even shop for groceries. But she could get her hair done. The law is for thee and not for me is something that kept cropping up in so many places. And now we have to wonder, is there any political connection to this disease? Now, I could go into a lot of people speculate, and I kind of wonder about this one. I'll be honest, I do wonder about a couple of things that come to mind. The great pandemic exercise back in October of last year that created the dashboard that we look at today from Johns Hopkins for how many people have been infected and how many people worldwide have died, or in any location you want to look at. And when I started my work in emergency management, that was our go-to location initially to find out how the world was doing and how we were doing. I noticed a couple of things by the end of April. In the county I served, I knew how many people had been tested. I knew how many people had tested positive. I knew how many people had supposedly died of COVID-19, though our own director of health in our county questioned it by often saying they may have died with COVID-19, but there's no way they died of COVID-19. I looked at the number of people that were hospitalized. And none of these numbers ever added up to the billing of what was supposed to occur in our county. Not in the first month, not in the second, not in the third. I'm still looking at the data that comes from that particular county. It never met the billing. People will say, yes, but see, by doing what you did, well, you didn't have the 3,000 deaths. Honestly, I'm beginning to suspect that we'd done nothing except maybe protect those elderly who were the most at risk, which, by the way, is what that particular county did. That's why deaths in a nursing home were a fraction of many other counties that I did some research about to see how they fared with this pandemic. There are some things you need to understand. I can remember in that county, going back to the month of March and into April, we had very few tests available to us to check people out. We were so limited on tests, we didn't test anybody that died. We may suspect they died of COVID-19 because, well, they had a fever or maybe one other symptom. It could have been anything. It could have been the flu. It could have been old age. In one case, an individual in their late 80s that was a heavy smoker, an alcoholic, and had spent the past year and a half in and out of the VA hospital on the verge of hospice care. Did he really die of COVID-19 and he would have lived many more years without it? Doubtful. I challenge the numbers, and I challenge the talking points that are often echoed. Let's go with the latest problem. As I was saying, back in March and April, our testing ability in this large county was extremely limited. When you came to be tested, you had to have multiple symptoms. You had to be literally extremely sick, or we had to turn you away because we simply did not have sufficient testing ability. Funny thing, as more tests were done, more cases were found. A case being defined as they are confirmed to have the virus, and also in many areas, including where I was at, if you did the blood test to see if you had the antigens, you were counted as a potential case in our numbers, even though you may have never had the first symptom. So guess what happened in that county? The number of infections or cases kept growing. Yet strangely, the number of hospitalizations was flat and declining. The same with the number of deaths. They peaked. They peaked a while back, and like the nationwide average, the number of deaths keeps declining, though the number of cases keeps rising. Now, why is that? I can answer that in a simple question. When you couldn't test, you couldn't count. It is now estimated by serious people, including even the CDC, who I don't always believe because I think there's some politics at play there. But let's just assume everything they're saying is true. They will tell you that the number of tests today in the United States is around 600,000. Not the 20 or 30,000 a day that we had not that long ago. And the amount of testing is rising, but the amount of deaths is declining. And many estimate that we missed 90% or more of those who actually had the virus. And out of those that had the virus, probably, we're beginning to learn now, many never knew they had it. I have a half-brother who is getting ready recently for some surgery now that the lockdowns of everything medical have been lifted. And by the way, many people never were treated for cancer or other diseases because of this lockdown. The hospitals wouldn't see them. And there have been people that died of heart issues and other diseases because they couldn't get into a hospital. My brother finally did. And in the routine prep to get him ready to schedule for surgery, they discovered that he must have had COVID-19. And right now, as often as he can, he is donating plasma to help those that may get sick with it, to help speed their recovery. Isn't that amazing? There's a lot we know and a lot we still have yet to learn. But the original predictions of 3 to 5 or 6% death rate of cases turns out to be nonsense, because you couldn't trust one of the figures in your equation as even being accurate at all, the number of actual cases. We had this number rising. We have it rising now, but the death numbers are simply not tracking like they did in the first months in March and April. And as testing began to get a little bit more in April, is where we crested the death rate. And that number has come down significantly day by day and week by week in the 7 to 10 day rolling average. And that's something else you got to remember. When you see some silly headline Ooh, we had a peak today. No, you didn't. In many cases, like in the county in which I served, we only gave our numbers once every so many days. The weekends, often, there's no count given. And so on a Monday or a Tuesday, you have this peak. It's from the numbers that are from 3 days total instead of a day-by-day average. So be careful about being deceived by how the numbers are used. There's an old saying, statistics don't lie, but you can lie with statistics. Numbers don't lie, but you can lie with numbers. And the bankrupt media does it each and every day. And if any positive news ever comes out, watch how fast it is walked back. Let me give you a classic example of something being walked back because it didn't fit the official narrative. Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove, now she's the technical lead on COVID-19 at the World Health Organization. Now, I fully understand, as many of you do, that early on, the WHO got a lot of things wrong. No doubt in my mind about that. Back during the month of June, the good doctor made these remarks at a conference explaining what we now know about the spread of COVID-19.
What proportion of asymptomatic individuals actually transmit? So the way that we look at that is we look at these individuals need to be followed carefully over the course of when they're detected and looking at secondary transmission. We have a number of reports from countries who are doing very detailed contact tracing. They're following asymptomatic cases, they're following contacts, and they're not finding secondary transmission onward. It's very rare. And much of that is not published in the literature. From the papers that are published, there's one that came out from Singapore looking at a long-term care facility. There are some household transmission studies where you follow individuals over time and you look at the proportion of those that transmit onwards. We are constantly looking at this data and we're trying to get more information from countries to truly answer this question. It still appears to be rare that an asymptomatic individual actually transmits onward. What we really want to be focused on is following the symptomatic cases. If we followed all of the symptomatic cases, because we know that this is a respiratory pathogen, it passes from an individual through infectious droplets. If we actually followed all of the symptomatic cases, isolated those cases, followed the contacts and quarantined those contacts, we would drastically reduce. I would love to be able to give a proportion of how much transmission we would actually stop. But it would be a drastic reduction in transmission. If we could focus on that, I think we would do very, very well in terms of suppressing transmission. But from the data we have, it still seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person actually transmits onward to a secondary individual.
Now, I know that was a bit long, about a minute and a half, and this came out of about a 3.5-minute presentation that Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove had made. And I want to play in a moment what I would consider the summation of what she was trying to tell us. And what really is suspicious on how in a couple of days, this technical lead expert, suddenly they're walking back some of what she had to say. Now, here is the gist of what Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove of the WHO, the World Health Organization, had to say.
From the data we have, it still seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person actually transmits onward to a secondary individual.
Now, let me see if I understand what Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove was telling us back in the month of June. They couldn't find any legitimate evidence of people that were asymptomatic passing along COVID-19. Now, they try to start saying, well, maybe some of the pre-symptomatic, they don't even know if that's even true. She's right. SARS-CoV, or CoV-2, that's the technical name, severe acute respiratory syndrome, is spread by the virus coming out of your lungs into the air in close proximity to somebody to get infected. And we also know more and more each day that it takes an extended period of time. Walking past somebody in a grocery store 3 feet away from you, 4 feet away, 5 feet away, where these viruses are swirling around your head, kind of reminiscent of the character Pigpen from the old Peanuts cartoon strip. Remember those? They want you to wear a mask because you may unknowingly spread this disease to somebody else, even though Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove, for whatever reason, says that's not the real method of transmission. I really believe, as I told you just a few minutes ago, we don't have 3 million or so infected in the United States. It's more like 30 million, 60 or 70 million that were infected. We're only seeing an uptick because, well, there is more testing and there are more people spending a lot of time in other people's faces long term, which they weren't doing for quite a while. But is wearing a mask really the necessary thing to do? I have, as part of my job, listened to Dr. Anthony Fauci and Dr. Deborah Birx at length. It's part of what I had to do in my job every day when they had their multi-hour updates. What has always disturbed me is how wrong Dr. Fauci has been. Multiple times, over and over and over and over and over again. He gets it wrong. It was about, a month and a half ago, even Dr. Birx admitted that when it came to coronavirus deaths, that probably at least 25%, in her opinion, had nothing to do with COVID-19. Remember, beginning in April, the way deaths were counted for COVID-19 dramatically changed. On April the 4th, they stopped counting flu deaths officially at the CDC. Now, let me say something. There is no doubt that many people have come down with COVID-19. My wife's daughter, who lives in New Jersey, went through about 10 days of a rough time about a month and a half ago with COVID-19. She is fully recovered now and back at work. A lot of people have had this disease and lived. We were, though, told that 3%, millions were going to die in the United States. And we prepared for that. Recently, we've seen the uptick in numbers. And it is a combination of people getting out for the first time after being locked down, and also increased testing. But the one number that does not continue to rise, little up and down motions, but the trend line of those being hospitalized, needing ICU care, is going down. The death numbers are declining dramatically since we were in the month of April. Less people die per day on take a 7-day rolling average. It keeps going down, even though the alleged case numbers, those that test positive or may have had it because they're finding that with serology testing, there's a lot of politics at play. And the mask, let me tell you about a mask. We've been told over and over again, a mask does not protect the wearer. Maybe certain very expensive types at 90% or 95% of these things that people wear. Well, do they really do you any good? Here's something that also came out of the WHO, which I tend to believe because this has been standard procedure with most hospitals and doctors for decades.
When you wear them, you must combine with hand hygiene and other preventive measures. WHO only recommends the use of masks in specific cases. If you have cough, fever, and difficulty breathing, you should wear a mask and seek medical care. If you do not have these symptoms, you do not have to wear masks because there is no evidence that they protect people who are not sick.
Here's what I do know. We were told early on a mask will not help you. Number one, because most masks you can buy, well, the holes in them for air to come through are hundreds, if not thousands of times bigger than the coronavirus. So we knew that they were not going to help you from getting it. Yet there's so many people running around driving their cars with gloves and a mask to protect themselves from all these viruses. Then the idea was, well, we'll wear them to protect other people if we have it. Maybe that's true, maybe that isn't. But if you have no symptoms, how are you going to spread it? In other words, there's a lot of politics going on. There's a lot of information out there that's hard to digest, but something to me just seems too political. It seems every time we get ahead of it, we have some new headline on CNN, breaking news, the case numbers are spiking, we're all going to die. Go to a Trump rally, you're going to die, but you protest in the streets, you'll be just fine. Go to church, you're going to die. But if you're burning and looting and shouting in somebody's face, hey, not a problem. There's politics at play. We're going to explore that over the next couple of weeks as we dig in and try to get you the real numbers without the silliness, without the hype. As Dr. Fauci said,
I do it when I'm in the public for the reasons that, A, I want to protect myself.
Now, just a cotton-picking minute, Dr. Fraud. I mean, Fauci, you've told us a mask does not protect us. It protects other people from us. Which is it?
And protect others. And also because I want to make it be a symbol for people to see that that's the kind of thing you should be doing.
Do you see my frustration with all of this? The rules keep changing. One day you need a mask. The next day you don't. If you don't wear one, people come after you because you're going to spread the coronavirus. If you're driving a car wearing gloves and a mask by yourself, you need your head examined. There's a lot of politics going on. I really know there's a lot of politics going on. We're going to share some real numbers. I got a guest coming up in the next hour. You need to hear these two people. Don Newen and Donna Fiducia. They're going to be my guest in the next segment here on Your Weekend Show.
On the air and online at yourweekendshow.com with Bob Bierman. It's Your Weekend Show with Bob Bierman.
And welcome back to the program, Donna Fiducia. I remember hearing her on WNBC radio many years ago, and also as a Fox News anchor. She and her husband, Don Newen, they produce a radio show and podcast called Cowboy Logic Radio. And it's my distinct pleasure to have both Don Newen and Donna Fiducia on the program today. Donna, I want to start by asking this question. Let's go back to your WNBC radio days in New York City. What was it like working with the likes of Don Imus and even Howard Stern?
Well, it was really a great honor to work with those guys. And a lot of people remember him from the Fox Business Channel at the latter part of his career, and he's unfortunately passed on. Howard, when I worked with him, was G-rated, if anybody can believe that, on AM radio. He had a 16 rating on AM radio, and that was when FM was really starting to take off. So we're talking early 80s. If you can imagine, that means 16% of New York City on an afternoon, no less, when most people are still working, had their radios tuned to AM, listening to Howard Stern. It was amazing. I remember, and I've told Don this a few times, one time when it was starting to get dark early, Howard said, Donna, why don't you fly up the West Side Highway? And everybody going south, coming down off the George Washington Bridge, flash their headlights at her. And I got to tell you, first of all, it was illegal to go that low, but we did. I got to tell you, probably at least 75 to 80% of the cars flashed their headlights. It was amazing.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. Listen, I worked out in Long Island, let's just say the middle of the island. And as I would go to work in the morning, I listened to, of course, Don Imus on WNBC. And then coming home in the afternoon, well, there he was, Howard Stern. And it was great being farther out on the island. I didn't have to worry about the traffic because I didn't have any that far out.
Well, half the time I never did traffic anyhow. We just kind of kibitzed the whole time. Which
I know. I remember.
You know? And then I, went on to WNEW-FM, which was the premier. Actually, I was at WNEW-FM first. And Mark Chernoff, who's still at WFAN, was the program director. And he said he went over to NBC and he called me up and he goes, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is you'll make a lot more money. The bad news is you're going to work with Howard Stern. I go, to me, that's a win-win scenario. I'll take it. So I went from NEW-FM, which I went to right out of college, to NBC, then back to NEW, because after a while I just didn't want to fly in the helicopter anymore. And remember, when Howard Stern was cleared out of NBC Radio, I was cleared out with him. It's in Robin Quiver's book. And she wrote all about it, how we all just went in one day, and despite that 16 rating, we all got fired because they said Howard was a liability. I worked also at VH1, then I went on to Good Day New York and the Today Show, and then Roger Ailes saw me and hired me at the Fox News Channel.
I remember those days, and yeah, Howard pushed the limit. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but that's also why he had such an incredible rating share in a market like New York City.
Well, Imus broke the ground for him, and then Howard took it to the next level. By today's standards right now, Howard is totally tame.
Absolutely.
When I worked with him anyhow. He's not anymore, obviously, but he was back then.
Then you ended up at Fox. So tell me about your career at Fox TV. I remember when I first bought a satellite dish living in Georgia by that time, and the whole idea of getting a satellite small dish was a pretty new concept. And there on Dish Network was Fox News. I
was there almost from the beginning. It was funny because I used to do the updates for Hannity and Combs and the O'Reilly Factor and Greta Van Susteren show. And Hannity comes in one day and he goes, because he grew up in Long Island too, but he was out for a few years in other markets. And then
he was in the Huntsville market, then Atlanta.
Anyhow, so he comes back in, and I'm doing his updates, and he goes, "Hey, I grew up listening to you." I'm like, "Geez, I'm like 2 years older than him." But it was a lot of fun to do that, and then I started doing weekends. I did the basically the updates that you see, the hour-long shows that are done right now on Sunday mornings and Saturday mornings. And then I started doing overnights, which I actually like because they let me do 4 nights to be full-time. And I had young kids, so I was able to make a decent salary only working 4 nights. And it opened my market and my name to the West Coast, because I had never really been on the West Coast. I had 30 years in New York City, so a lot of people knew me because it's prime time in L.A., so that was kind of a lot of fun. And there's a lot of breaking news overnight. Unfortunately, Fox has gotten away from that because they honestly don't really have anybody that can handle breaking news, in my opinion, without a prompter anymore. And that's sad, except obviously in prime time.
So how did you end up, long story short, how did you end up in the South where you are now?
Well, you can blame Don Newen because he's a professional musician. We knew a lot of the same people from rock and roll. And Don sort of did audio for a bunch of rather large, well-known bands, and then kind of went into driving the buses and leasing those rock and roll buses out. And so when he was up in New York one day, he gave me a tour of the bus, and I gave him a tour of the Fox News Channel. But we had discovered that we knew each other for many, many years, and we were both sort of going through divorces at the same time. We had marriages that lasted over almost 24 years, both of us. But so it was time to move on, and we kind of got together. And when I didn't continue at Fox, I came down to Atlanta and been down here for 12 years. And then we tried to retire from radio. I did in 2008, and obviously that didn't work when Obama got elected, and we decided we'd try to do our own radio show and give the other side of what a lot of people aren't talking about.
That's right.
Here we are this many years later.
And now you do a radio show, and I've heard of your show many, many times over the last several years. And I think we have a mutual friend in a guy by the name of Matt Bruce. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
And I'm going to give you a little insight. I served as a pastor of a church in the Sarasota area for a number of years, but Clear Channel discovered that I was also an engineer, and they got me to be a part-time at a pretty outrageous fee as a consultant. And then another radio station that was a news talker was trying to rebuild, and I rebuilt it. And that's when I met Matt Bruce, who we put on the radio because he was one of those kind of guys that was determined. I am going to do a radio show somehow, some way, if it's the last thing I ever do. And now he does that.
And he's tireless. He is absolutely tireless. He does a wonderful overnight show, 6 nights a week. I don't know how he does it.
Right.
Because I did 4 nights a week, and I was always tired. But no, he does a great show right now. And so Don, who is a radio engineer as well, my husband, put this whole studio together in our basement. So here we are in a little town outside Carrollton, Georgia, doing this radio show. It's 2 hours, called Cowboy Logic Radio, and you can find it at cowboylogic.us. We've partnered with a number of people, including Matt Bruce and his radio show. But if you go to cowboylogic.us, you can listen to our archive shows and listen to a stream that we have of all of our shows 24/7, a number of other hosts as well. But we've had all the A-listers on. I mean, I don't want to throw names around, but Sidney Powell has become a very good friend of ours, and we had her on probably 4 years ago. And we had dinner with her 2 years ago around Memorial Day. And we were out in Dallas at Carry the Load, which does a lot of great work for Wounded Warriors.
Yes, they do.
And Don had 3 buses there. So we're out in Rivershore Park in Dallas. And Sydney came over and saw the buses, and we go out to dinner. And we started talking about General Flynn. And Don said to her, what did you actually say to her, honey?
Well, the way this ends up happening is back in 2014, we started interviewing Sydney. And it was to help to promote her book, License to Lie. And throughout the course of what now would be 6 years, we have her on as a regular guest. And a couple of years ago, I asked her, I said, Sydney, if you were to advise and represent General Flynn, what would you advise him to do? And this was before she accepted counsel for him. And without missing a beat, she said he would withdraw the guilty plea.
Yep.
And fire his current attorneys.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. And so move the clock forward another year or so. And we're eating dinner with her, like Donna said, last year, 2019 Memorial Day weekend. And probably spent, 6 or 7 hours just kind of BSing around.
Drove around, saw the neighborhood, had some ice cream elsewhere. It was fun.
And about 2 weeks later, all of a sudden, she's representing Flynn. So, we wanted to give her some time. We didn't have her on the show while she was knee-deep in the weeds with the Flynn deal. But we would communicate with her from time to time. Well, we ended up bringing her on to the show to kind of give us a Flynn update. And I asked her, I said, when we were sitting there eating dinner, you knew about this.
She goes, yeah, I did.
Say anything. And she did, in fact, know. She knew. But she's a dear, dear friend and a hell of a lawyer. Yeah. I think she would make a wonderful deputy attorney general. And I would love her to be able to sit on the Supreme Court someday.
Could you imagine her working with Barr or being on the Supreme Court?
Oh, I would love it. It would mean
some way you could negate Roberts at all here.
I know, and to me, I was telling my wife the other night that I remember the Bush years with mixed emotions because obviously in 2000 there was no way I was going to vote for Al Gore. And John F. Kerry was, not going to happen either in 2004. And I hate to say it, but I always felt that I was voting for the lesser of two evils between 2000 and 2008. And I just felt that there's something wrong with this equation. This is not a Reagan-esque type individual at all. And I felt uncomfortable. And then when I saw what they were putting up, McCain one time, and then you got Mitt Romney the next. I'm going, is this all we have? Is this the best we can as a party or as conservatives come up with Two of
well,
the
they don't
most,
want to. It's deep staters. They don't want to. I mean, these people are aligning themselves against Donald Trump, and everybody says, "Oh, Donald Trump stinks." And well, think about it. He defeated 16 very well-known politicians,
including another Bush. Jeb Bush early on.
Right. But the thing is, so think of how many people kind of are resentful of Donald Trump and how deep into the weeds these deep staters are.
Like John
They
Kasich.
just don't want to see him. Right. They don't want to see him. McCain, we have Obamacare because of Roberts and McCain. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is insanity. And I really feel, every year I keep thinking this election's the most important. This election's the most important. Well, this really is a pretty darn important election. If we lose this, I think what you see in Seattle is what we will have coming to everyone's back door.
On my program, I've talked a lot about this pandemic and the politics of this pandemic. And having come out of retirement for about 2.5 months, I went to work, I won't say where, for a very large county in their emergency management effort. In another life, after I lost my first wife to cancer, I ended up getting out of radio, became a public information officer for an emergency management agency, and learned how to do planning. Don't ask how that happened, but I started getting into disaster planning and mitigation. So that's why I was asked to come out of retirement to be prepared for thousands of deaths and hundreds of, tens of thousands crowding into the hospitals. We're all going to die. And my heart told me to fear not. And I started seeing chinks in the armor of Anthony the Fraud Fauci and others. And there's a lot about this pandemic that is more political than accurate. Right down to, in Washington State, 5 individuals that died of gunshot wounds were listed as COVID-19. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are probably thousands of deaths that had nothing to do with COVID-19. We are now counting antigen testing of people from weeks and months or whatever ago, could be a common cold. They're literally stacking the numbers to keep us in fear because the Democrats, they want that mail-in voting. The Democrats, they want chaos. The Democrats, they don't want Biden in front of a large crowd at a convention because the whole thing implodes the second he comes out and spends any quality time in front of a TV camera. He's toast.
We only have roughly, not even 100 million people left in the country, because 150,000 died from gunshot wounds, another 120
million died of coronavirus.
The population is nearly extinct here in the United States, according to Biden.
That's right.
Can you imagine if Trump made these mistakes?
The beauty of it, guys, is that you don't have to worry about the traffic in the morning.
No,
and I, for one, am so relieved to know that we have lost that many people to gunshot wounds and to COVID-19 that my commute is going to be nothing.
Well, I have a list here right now, Bob, that says the CDC estimates, of course, remember early on, were 2.2 million were going to die immediately. So we just needed 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
You know how many refrigerator trucks I had to go locate from grocery store chains to be prepared for our 3,000 deaths by June?
Yeah, I know.
And we did. And we found them all. And you know how many people died as of the end of June, no less. Forget the 1st of June. In the place we were told to prepare for 3,000. And we're trying to get a line on body bags, everything. We had what they counted as 39. Mm-hmm. And out of the
there's 129,000 now nationwide.
Here's what we got to remember. You can't shut down the greatest economy in the history of mankind with 39 deaths.
No, and on top of that...
So it's got to be 3,000. 3,000 in your area must die in order to shut down the economy.
And let me tell you something. Out of those 39, I would venture to say at least 20 were only mildly implicated to COVID-19. Somebody that is 86, that refuses to quit smoking, that is a heavy drinker, who has liver cancer, who has been in and out of the VA hospital for the last 5 years and on hospice care, suddenly comes down with COVID-19, and that's the only cause listed for his death.
Well, George Floyd had COVID-19, but he didn't die from that, I don't believe.
I don't think so either.
But the thing is, this is how they scare everybody. Now, remember, Donald Trump was a xenophobe and whatever. I didn't even know what xenophobia was, but January 21st was the first report. On the 31st, he stopped China travel ban, and Biden called him a fearmonger. They all could. On the 4th of February, the World Health Organization said Trump's travel ban just was a fear and a stigma.
Besides,
the EU criticized Trump for the travel ban.
Besides, the same people at the WHO said this is not even a contagious virus. Right.
On March 9th, Fauci said no face coverings are needed and it's okay to go on a cruise. That was March 9th. Almost 6 weeks later. And Nancy Pelosi said on February 24th, go to Chinatown, have fun for the new year. So this, to me, was something that they finally, as they started to get into it, thought, wow, this is a perfect storm. And it really is, because you've got a second wave coming now. You're killing the economy, because we all know it's the economy, stupid. Biden is kept in the basement, and you're pushing for voting by mail.
Exactly.
It's a win-win scenario for the Democrats, who have absolutely no platform whatsoever except Orange Man Bad, and he tweets.
My wife has got wonderful friends that are like in our age bracket, the 60s, and they're all deathly afraid of coronavirus, and we have to wear a mask, and we have to do social distancing. We have to. And I'm telling you, I am not seeing the death and destruction.
No.
I also recognize this virus seems to literally now, I said this 2 months ago, and people thought I was crazy. I said, you're going to find out this virus is less lethal. It doesn't give symptoms to most people. We now realize that 90% of the people that have been, I'll use the word loosely, infected, they never show symptoms because their body is already able to or was able to quickly fight the virus and kill it off before it ever started.
I have two cousins who were extremely sick back in Christmas time, so badly that they didn't even want to come up to see me when I went to New Jersey to see them. And I said, finally, go get tested. And they didn't even have it. It was seasonal flu.
Right.
Now, there have been, on July 4th, I keep numbers every single day. I check it. Yesterday, there were 241 additional COVID deaths. And you know that they do pretty much bloat those numbers.
Absolutely.
Nationwide. 241 out of 330 million people. That's like 0.0000 something or other.
People will die, Donna. People will die.
Yeah, let me tell you something.
Bernie Sanders imitation.
Let me.
People will die, Bob.
Yeah, I know.
Bob, I'm telling you.
Let me
tell you. They're going to die.
Let me tell you. I learned something early on, that during the flu season this year, in order to be counted as a flu death, you had to have had a flu confirmed by a test diagnostic or a post-mortem diagnostic, or if you died of pneumonia and they never tested you, you simply died of pneumonia. They never mentioned the flu. Now, April 4th, from their own website, because I saw it personally, the CDC...
Yep, I saw that too. I know what you're going to say.
The CDC stopped counting flu deaths on the 4th of April. Period. Then they changed.
Stopped counting COVID-19 too.
And they started suddenly. You could assume a death if it was pneumonia. Call it COVID-19, not the flu. People, like I say, that died of other things unrelated to COVID-19, like a car accident. And by the way, one more little statistic that I have uncovered. You'll hear somebody say our hospital is at 94% capacity. Well, I know one TV station, I've watched their report, asked a couple of questions when that story popped up, and the administrator says, well, our hospital has 300 beds. We're only using and staffing 100, and we are using 94 of those 100 rooms right now. We could open up the other 200. They don't tell you that part.
Well, the problem is they had everything shut down for the quote-unquote extra
surge.
Surgeries or non-essential surgery. So now that surge is coming in. That's number one. And number two, I have a doctor friend who's up in Tennessee, and I have another one, my cousin, who's in Houston. They both confirm, and the one in Houston now obviously would see it since they had the Floyd funeral there of over 100,000 people suddenly convert. He goes, they're normal now. They're up to normal capacity at this point. A hospital is like a hotel. Mm-hmm. They want to be full, because if they aren't full, they don't have full capacity.
Exactly.
They don't make any money.
I'll give you one more from Miami, Florida. A person was severely injured, two people severely injured in an automobile accident. They were at the emergency room to be treated for their injuries, and they both tested positive for corona. And so they are now considered hospitalized for coronavirus, not the fact that they had a car wreck.
Well, and people who have gone in for these elective surgeries now, same thing. They have to go through a COVID test.
They don't get federal funding for car accidents.
Hey, right.
They don't get federal funding for gunshot wounds.
My half-brother
funding for cancer treatment on COVID.
Right. My half-brother has been delayed on getting a procedure done for, of course, since back in March. And they tested him positive for COVID-19. Now, he's the kind of a guy that should be dying from this because he does have a number of very serious health issues, and he's as healthy as a horse and has never experienced any symptoms. And so they're figuring that, well, you must have been exposed to it or had it, or, you're testing both for antigen and the positive. So he is listed as a COVID-19 patient going in for a digestive surgery.
It's unbelievable. They get $13,000 for a positive, and they get $39,000 if they're put on a ventilator.
That's right.
Plus, the doctors can't be sued. Trump could end this overnight by saying tort reform. You cannot be sued if you want to open. Because then a business like Don's that has rock and roll buses that obviously aren't rolling right now because nobody's having a concert, that, you go in there, it's called assume risk. Right now, we have, after Independence Day, we have fewer freedoms in this country than we fought the Revolutionary War over.
Absolutely.
This is getting pathetic, and it's to me it's no different than communism. If a mayor's telling you can't open and you don't open, how is that a free country?
Everything that was laid on my heart. Remember, I'm also in ministry, so before I headed up to this other state, we were down at our home in Florida, and I was asked to speak at a church. And I threw away my notes, and I gave an entire message on fear not, and everything that I felt suddenly very wrong about this. And people challenged me after that service, but what if it's really as serious as they say it's going to be? We could have millions of people dying and hundreds of millions. They're going to be so sick they can't function for weeks and months. And my answer was fear not. And ever since that day, as things get worse and the underlying information just leaks out and gets out, and you begin to use common sense and logic, that's why I like the name of your show, Cowboy Logic, just simple common sense, reason, mathematics, real world stuff, and you realize that this is being used for politics, and it has very little to do with public health.
Well, this far into it, when we had 2 weeks to flatten the curve, all of a sudden, blue states still won't open. I mean, this is insane. And they're even attacking Tennessee right now, which I checked a couple days ago, I think had 653 total deaths in the entire state. Because Nashville is trying to reopen, but Nashville's extremely liberal. They wanted to have a couple concerts. I believe there was a country artist who had a concert, and he got attacked for it. I mean, this is... they're attacking every single possible swing state, which is really obvious, and just in general to hurt Trump because, as Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid.
Wolf in Pennsylvania is a good example. Wolf in Pennsylvania is trying to keep that on the blue side. Think about Michigan. Think about Ohio. Think about Wisconsin. They're going to fight to the death. And they're going to fight to keep people in fear all the way through election. I'm going to give you two stats, and then you can take them for what they're worth. In my work, I followed several think tanks, as we all did, to get comparative views. There's one based out of Europe that has been on target every step of the way. They have been so far ahead of the curve. And they've been talking about how the deaths would go up, and they had predicted the peak of deaths around Easter time in April. And then it would be a slow descent from that point. But it wouldn't be a rapid, it would be a slow descent because of what we're doing with flattening the curve. Instead of having them come up fast and down fast like Sweden did, we're doing this manipulation. They predict this virus will burn out before November entirely.
Oh, no, but then SARS will come in. Fauci's already talking about that, some second wave of some SARS. But viruses have been there since the beginning of time. This is crazy. The one thing obvious that, in my opinion, that Trump has to start doing something on is the crime rate. because now New York City's shootings have doubled year over year to date. The same thing, and of course, they've totally ignored Chicago, which has been black on black crime for decades.
You got it.
But every single major city has been Democrat run, and most of the states Democrat run for decades. What have they done for the black community? Nothing. I think we should defund the teachers' unions and the public school system, because that's where the real problem exists, not the cops.
Donna, you know what I'm about to say. In your line of work on television, the hard break is coming, and it doesn't wait for no man. You know that from your time. We're getting up there in about a minute. And I want to thank you both for being on the program today. And I hope that I can have you, forward me some segments that you think are worthy of an expanded audience, and I'd like to include them on your weekend show and get it out to other places to help you out and have you back frequently. I just envision a network of people using these tools at our fingertips, because when you have the one well-paid target, that's what they become. But it's hard to silence dozens or 100 voices as it is to silence one. And that's why I encourage people to find your site, find your program, listen as often as they can. Remind them how to find your program.
Well, they can go to cowboylogic.us. That's going to be the easiest way to find our programming. Obviously, if they go to your website, you're going to be able to direct them and have them listen on your feed as well, and all of your affiliates. But cowboylogic.us is the best place to find us. We've got AM/FM affiliates, we've got internet affiliates, but we do have a stream that runs 24/7 that's pretty much exclusively all Cowboy Logic radios 24/7. So that's a good place to get kind of an overload dose of Cowboy Logic.
And we have a phone app. Just put it on your phone, hit play, and listen in.
Excellent. Listen, Donna, I want to thank you for taking the time to be on the show today. We truly live in a very different world than I grew up in back in the 50s and 60s, and I think you would agree. I can remember a different time, and I just am in fear about how many people are gullible and are being led like sheep to the slaughter. When Mr. Biden made this wonderful statement, do you remember when he said,
"We choose truth over facts"?
You remember that line? That was a Freudian slip. You can alter the truth. The Nazis did that in World War II, but you can't alter the facts. And that's why Democrats, they look at the Ministry of Truth from George Orwell. They value the truth that they lay out that you are to believe, and damn the facts. That's what it comes down to.
Wonder what Orwell would think right now if he saw what was going on.
He would not believe he was a prophet.
Yeah, he was. Decades early, but he was right on.
Don and Donna, where did this half hour go? I want to thank you for being on your weekend show this weekend. Once again, we've just run out of time. I want to thank everybody for listening. Don't forget the website, yourweekendshow.com. That's yourweekendshow.com. Until next week, at the same time, may God richly bless you.
Your Weekend Show with Bob Bierman.